Okay, here we go. People say that people who die by suicide are selfish. People who die by suicide are foolish. People who die by suicide are stupid. People who die by suicide are this and that. So many labels out there, right? Now the question is suicide intentional or unintentional? Is it a choice? Today I want us to define suicide and understand. I believe when we understand the true meaning of suicide, we'll be able to approach this sensitive issue with the compassion and empathy and kindness it deserves. So let's define suicide together, okay? Let's start by the common definition of suicide. So I'll read from the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization says that suicide is understood as an act of deliberately killing oneself, according to the World Health Organization, okay? According to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, they say that suicide is death caused by injuring oneself with the intent to die. Based on this definition, you can now agree and say that, well, suicide is intentional. It's a choice. They say that it's a deliberate act. Next, they say that with the intent to die. Therefore, it's a choice. It's intentional, according to the definition. My question now is this true? Is this true for everyone? Does it mean that any person or everyone who ever dies by suicide, the act was intentional? Is that true? Well, let's check the facts. My understanding is that for us to know the true definition of something, we have to check its roots. So let's define suicide from its roots. Let's break it down. I know for sure, for a fact, that suicide is a construct of two words put together. And these words are, number one, SUI. SUI, which means oneself. Sui means oneself. The other part, which is side, sidium or sidium, means an act of killing. Now, when we put these two words together, they make a sentence, which is an act of killing oneself. I am not seeing any part where it says intentional. I am not seeing any part where it says deliberate act. I am not seeing any part where it says this is a choice. Therefore, it is not right to say the act is intentional without understanding, without considering the circumstances of the act itself. Therefore, there are exceptions to suicide. That's my understanding. There are exceptions to suicide. So what are these exceptions to suicide? Because from this definition, they are telling us it's a deliberate act. So now, before I give you two exceptions to suicide, I want to make you understand where I'm coming from. I've interviewed 3,000 people in Zambia, okay? 3,000 people. Out of 3,000 people, 1,624 considered suicide. Some of them attempted suicide, okay? Some nearly attempted suicide. Now, these are people who they were not aware of their actions. And these people were about 205. 205 people unintentionally nearly attempted suicide. It was so fortunate that someone was there to prevent them before the act happened. They were not aware of the act. This is where the two exceptions that I'm talking about come in. So I'll read from my book, Bury Suicide, Not Yourself. And these are two exceptions. So number one, professionally speaking, if any exceptions are to be made, the only valid one involves individuals with severe mental or psychotic conditions that significantly impair cognitive functioning. These conditions can lead to irrationality and a complete lack of awareness of their own actions. Such rare cases are best described as psychosis-induced suicide or non-volitional suicide. acts that resemble suicide in form but not in conscious intent or will. So I talked about this in my first book, Why People Die by Suicide and What to Do About It. That's the first exception. That's the first exception. Second exception. There are individuals who come under dark spiritual influences or forces. Cases where the person is spiritually manipulated or oppressed and made to end their lives without their own true will. This can be described as spirit-induced suicide or unwilled suicide, where external spiritual forces hijack a person's mind or will and override their ability to choose life. These are my two exceptions. Therefore, in my view, I wrote in the book, these two categories, psychosis-induced suicide and spirit-induced suicide, fall under the people Jesus prayed when he said, you know the verse, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. I believe that there are some people who die by suicide without knowing what they are doing. I believe that. Psychosis-induced suicide or spirit-induced suicide. These things exist, and people are dying by suicide because of these mental or psychotic conditions or spiritual forces, external spiritual forces that hijacks their mind or their personal will to choose life. These are exceptions. But we don't talk about these things. All we do is just label people as selfish, foolish, stupid, this and that. But do you understand? Were you aware of this? And some of you are aware of this, but you still won't go ahead and judge people. That's why there's so much stigma out there. That's why people are unable to reach out. That's why people are dying by suicide, because you are judging them. You are labeling them as foolish, stupid, selfish, this and that, but you know for a fact that there are these exceptions. Some of you don't know, now you know. So I expect you to approach this sensitive issue with empathy and compassion. Be kind, understand it. This definition, I hope, will help you understand how serious this issue is. So don't go out there and judge people. Seek to understand, how was this? How did this happen? In what condition? What were the circumstances? Okay? That's why we don't say die. That's why we don't say committed suicide. We say die by suicide. They died by suicide. No, they didn't commit suicide. They didn't commit suicide. They died by suicide. They didn't complete. They died by suicide. Okay? Not committed. Why? Because you don't know. You don't know if the act was intentional or unintentional. You don't know. You don't know. Now, I'm not here to justify certain acts of suicide. Please get this clear. Like I said, out of the 3,000 I interviewed, I said 1,624 considered suicide, and I said 205 were unintentional, which means the rest, these are the people who were aware of the act. This is where now, according to the World Health Organization and the centers, CDC, they say it's a deliberate act or it's an intentional act, where this is where the part people say it's a choice. Yes, the majority of it are aware of the act, but that does not mean we should judge these people. Let's find ways we can be compassionate. Let's find ways on how we can make them understand that actually their lives matter. They do matter. Let's tell them that they are not alone in this situation. Let's seek. My lips are drying.